A role can disappear from your life long before your ability to matter does. You may retire from a job where people once depended on your judgment. Your children may no longer need the same kind of help. A marriage may end. A caregiving season may be over. You may leave a leadership position, move away from a community, or simply stop being the person everyone calls first. And when that role ends, something unsettling can happen. The calendar changes, but so does the way you see yourself. For years, the role may have answered questions you rarely had to ask directly. Who am I? Where do I belong? What do I contribute? Why does my day matter? Then the structure disappears, and the mind can make a painful substitution. If the role is gone, maybe my relevance is gone too. But a role and your relevance are not the same thing. A role is a position. Relevance is the effect your presence, experience, attention, judgment, and care can still have in the world around you. The confusion happens because roles are visible. They come with names, routines, responsibilities, and feedback. Relevance is often quieter. A manager gets meetings, messages, decisions, and deadlines. A parent of young children gets constant requests. A caregiver has an obvious reason to be needed. A volunteer leader has a place to show up and a problem to solve. When those signals stop, the absence can feel like evidence. But silence is not proof that your value has disappeared. Sometimes it only means the old system that reflected your value back to you is no longer there. Imagine a man in his late 60s who retires after decades in a technical profession. He was respected, competent, and used to people asking for his opinion. His days were full of small confirmations that he mattered. Someone needed a decision. Someone needed a solution. Someone wanted his experience. Retirement is supposed to feel like freedom. At first, it does. Then the phone gets quieter. The people who once called him every day continue without him. Projects move forward. New people take over. Nothing cruel happens. That is what makes it difficult. He begins to feel unnecessary. So he starts looking for ways to recreate the old role. He checks in with former colleagues more than they need. He gives advice before anyone asks. He tries to stay informed about decisions that are no longer his responsibility. What he misses is not only the work. He misses evidence of relevance. That distinction matters because if you do not recognize it, you may spend years trying to recover the exact structure that once made you feel important. But relevance does not have to return in the same form. This is the first shift. The end of a role creates a gap between identity and reality. Your external position may change quickly, while your internal sense of self changes much more slowly. That lag can produce discomfort, even when the transition was chosen. You may know intellectually that retirement is normal, that children grow up, that organizations move on, that families change. But emotionally, you can still feel as if something has been taken from the center of who you are. The answer is not to pretend the loss does not matter. Roles matter because they organize life. They create rhythms, relationships, expectations, and belonging. Losing one can involve real grief. But grief becomes more confusing when it turns into a verdict about your future. I am no longer doing that, quietly becomes, I am no longer useful. Those are very different statements. Usefulness is also not the same as relevance. You can be useful by solving a problem. You can be relevant by helping someone see the problem differently. You can be useful by completing a task. You can be relevant by bringing steadiness into a room. You can be useful because people depend on you. You can be R. Later in life, this distinction can become especially important because some of the most meaningful forms of contribution become less visible. You may mentor one person instead of managing 20. You may listen instead of lead. You may become the person who notices what everyone else is rushing past. You may bring context to a family conversation because you remember what happened 10 or 20 years ago. You may help a younger person avoid a mistake, not by controlling their decision, but by asking a better question. None of that comes with a title. But it can matter deeply. The deeper inversion is that losing a role can sometimes reveal how narrowly you had defined relevance in the first place. If relevance meant being indispensable, then independence in other people may feel like rejection. If relevance meant being consulted, then silence may feel like erasure. If relevance meant being busy, then spaciousness may feel like emptiness. But those interpretations come from the old role. They are not necessarily descriptions of the life you have now. A useful question is not, how do I become important again? It is, where does what I know, notice, and care about still have a place? That question is smaller, but more honest. It does not require a grand reinvention. It may point toward a conversation, a skill you can share, a relationship you can deepen, a local contribution, a creative practice, or a kind of presence that was difficult when your old role consumed most of your attention. The man who retired eventually notices something simple. His neighbor is trying to repair an old piece of equipment. He could easily take over. Years ago, that is exactly what he would have done. Instead, he asks the neighbor what he has already tried. They spend an hour working through the problem together. The solution matters less than the interaction. For the first time, he sees that his experience still has value even when he is not the authority in the R. That is the second shift. Relevance after a role change is often less about occupying the center and more about participating with intention. You do not have to become the person everyone depends on again. You may become someone who contributes without controlling, guides without directing, notices without performing, and cares without making yourself responsible for everything. That can feel smaller to the part of you that was trained to recognize importance through position. But smaller is not the same as lesser. Sometimes it is more precise. And there is another freedom here. When relevance is no longer tied to a role, you can become more selective about where you give your attention. Not every request deserves your experience. Not every problem requires your intervention. Not every relationship needs you to prove your value. You can contribute because something matters to you, not because your identity depends on being required. That is a different kind of relevance. It is less anxious, less performative, and often more sustainable. So if a role has ended and you feel strangely invisible, do not rush to fill the space with another title. First, notice what you believe the old role proved about you. Did it prove that you were competent, needed, respected, connected, useful? Then ask whether those qualities truly disappeared when the role did. They probably did not. What disappeared was one particular place where those qualities were recognized. The task now is not to recreate the past exactly. It is to discover where those qualities can live next. The end of a role can be painful because it closes a chapter that gave your life structure and recognition. But it does not erase what you learned inside that chapter. It does not erase your capacity to contribute. And it does not erase your relevance. Sometimes the next version of relevance is quieter, more local, and less visible. But if it is grounded in what you genuinely know, care about, and can offer, it may also be more fully yours. If this reflection speaks to where you are now, continue with the meaning, emptiness and purpose playlist. And if you want more thoughtful conversations about purpose, identity, and life after 50, subscribe to Inner Life Decoded.